Looking at them now, you'd never suspect the nightmares these children have lived, the horrors seared into their memories. Children like Patricia Anyanga, who loves to dance. It's one time when she doesn't think about her tragic past, how both of her parents were dead by the time she was 10 years old.
I pray, I say, God, why can't you help me? See where I am now.
Children like Charles Otto, a young boy found living in a ditch on the side of the road.
My mother died in my hand, so it pains me a lot up today.
And Jeffrey Alau, whose parents both were brutally murdered.
I was just told that your parents have been killed by LRA rebels. So from there it was very painful for me.
They are among Uganda's estimated 2.5 million children, orphaned mostly by AIDS and civil war, and they're considered the lucky ones, thanks in part to help from an unlikely group of friends 9,000 miles away.
Just to see those kids out there to suffer the way they do and all the violence and stuff, and you know, the things they go through daily just to survive and stuff, and to see how little they got and how happy they are, it's like, you know, it's like, it makes you feel guilty when you get mad about something here, you know, it's crazy.
Pete Sostilio's home is here at Snake River Correctional Institution on the Oregon-Idaho border, half a world away from Uganda.
I've been incarcerated for going on 16 years.
16 years of an 18-year sentence for kidnapping. Pete and his fellow inmates first heard about the orphans in a prison chapel service. It was the beginning of what would become a special and strong connection between the prisoners and orphans. It's a connection that often surprises people.
Being in prison, you know, we all want another chance. You know, we know what it's like to make a mistake and want to, you know, somebody to believe in us and to help us. And to see those kids out there, you know, they didn't do nothing wrong. You know, and to be able to give them a second chance is a lot.
Their lives have become intertwined with the help of Bob and Carol Higgins, retired high school teachers from Bend, Oregon. Fate and faith conspired to form this uniquely blended family. You see, the truth is, Bob and Carol had absolutely no interest in visiting a prison, and even less interest in going to Africa.
We never had Africa as a place to visit. We really hadn't gone hardly any places. We were pretty much stay-at-home people. I think on an anniversary we went to New Zealand.
Bob and Carol, the stay-at-home people, were about to see their lives changed in ways they could not have imagined. As 1999 was about to give way to a new century, they were about to leave that home they loved and make a new home half a world away. A home they would one day fill with children they hadn't yet met, children whose lives at stunningly tender ages had been shattered by violence and heartbreaking loss. Charles was staying in a relative's house when the rebels rampaged through their village.
We were sleeping in the house, me and my cousin sisters and my cousin brothers. So they just came and knocked the door, and they told us to open the door, and we opened. So they took us, me and my cousin sisters and the rest. So at that time I was 7 years old.
And Lydia Abonyo, after her father died in 1995, her mother was inherited by his family.
She produced more for us, one girl and 3 boys. And she also died in 2007. And she left 7 of us. They did not tell me what killed my father, but my mother died. She just started falling sick and she became paralyzed. All the left side got paralyzed and the right sides were functioning, but the left side just got paralyzed.
And there is Linda Apayo, who lost both of her parents to AIDS.
Then one of my aunties came and picked me. She took me and I was staying with her. So, but in this issue of staying with her, she had children, 5 of them. She don't used to care for me all that much. Whenever I asked her for the money for school fees, she didn't used to give me. She would like tell me that, what you want money from me?
31% of Uganda's population lives on less than $1 a day. Women there spend an average of 9 hours each day hauling water, gathering wood, and caring for family. Shanta Bloman works for UNICEF in Africa and has seen the challenge faced by extended families who take in orphans.
The impact of absorbing these extra children when families are already large can be an enormous burden on a family. So an uncle or an aunt who may want to care for their brother or sister's children is going to be stretched, perhaps to the point where they won't have enough food to feed all of their children. So they're put in a very difficult situation.
Often, the children who are accepted into extended families become indentured servants, taking care of the younger children, not allowed to go to school. That's what happened to Jimmy O'Toole. As a toddler, he lost part of his right foot in a fire when his mother, who was deaf, could not hear his screams.
As she could not do anything, we were distributed to our various relatives, and there was no school fees. I used to stay at home to cook and do other things. Life was difficult. It was so difficult.
Bob and Carol hadn't yet met them, or the children who were forced to see and do horrific things. Caught in the scourge of the roving rebel militia formed over 2 decades ago by a madman and self-styled mystic named Joseph Kony, who gave his killing band the terribly ironic name Lord's Resistance Army.
God said in the Bible that I will unleash my wrath upon you and you will suffer pain.
Kony's goal, overthrow the Ugandan government so he could rule the country, in his words, according to the 10 Commandments. Kony's painfully long rampage across northern Uganda led to the abduction of tens of thousands of children like Jeffrey. After Jeffrey's parents were killed, he was taken in by his uncle. He came home one day to find his butchered body.
My uncle was killed also. He was cut into pieces. They did not begin with from the neck here. They began from the leg going upwards. So it was very painful. It was very painful.
Jeffrey was abducted by the same people who murdered his uncle.
If you try to resist, they can kill you and leave you there.
The Lord's Resistance Army started in the mid-80s. It's a 20-year conflict that finally ended in Uganda around 2005, 2006. Children were the prime fodder for feeding their military might. In northern Uganda, there was an estimated 35,000 children that were abducted during the course of the conflict. And these children were forced to do incredibly brutal, horrific things, including killing their own parents.
Your nose will be cut off together with your ears, and in the end, the sword will kill you. Your children will be taken into captivity, and they'll be burned to death.
Jeffrey, a tiny boy, had no doubt Kony's thugs could make good on the threats. He had seen it firsthand.
They gather those people, they collect them together, and they burn them. They burn them all with petrol. So it was not easy. While I'm seeing like that.
Trying to escape the hell the LRA was visiting on innocent villages, nearly 2 million Ugandans left their homes for overcrowded internally displaced persons camps, barely surviving on donated food. 180,000 remain in the camps today. Others, who chose to stay in their villages, sent their children, tens of thousands of them, packing each night, hoping for safety. They were known as the night commuters, children who streamed into towns, mats and blankets in hand, hoping not to be kidnapped.
For many districts in the north, there was a period of just absolute terror for a long, long period where They didn't know if villages were going to be massacred or their children were going to be abducted. So obviously the scars of this conflict are still very, very real, and many of the children are still returning now and dealing with the horror of having been forced to fight, even some for a decade in a conflict that they had no choice to be in.
Conflict was nothing new in northern Uganda. As far back as the 70s, when Idi Amin gained power in a military coup, there had not been any significant period of peace. Amin was a brutal leader who killed somewhere between 100,000 and 500,000 of his own people. The 80s brought new rebel militias, the most notorious being the Lord's Resistance Army. No one living in northern Uganda during the LRA's reign of terror was unaffected, including artist Isaac Okwir. He was not abducted, never became physically involved in the war, but he estimates he has worked with some 500 former child soldiers, helping them to express what they've experienced through art, hoping to help the children heal.
There was war going on in my head.
Isaac wanted to get the children's stories out, wanted people to understand what they'd been through.
I felt there was need that somebody hear about them. In Uganda, most people would say you are only an artist. All I had was a pencil, paper, sometimes canvas, then my brushes. What can I do with only these things that I have to help in this very big situation? So I started on transforming the stories I would hear from them into the way I visually see it. Slowly by slowly, I felt I was being deeply rooted into the war. In fact, there are times I would feel like I am part of them. I am in the bush. So it gave me actually the eye to see and be able to portray, I think, exactly what they felt.
Okwir also wanted to address the problem of children returning to the villages that now feared them.
In that big picture, I portrayed a half of the child just to portray anonymity. It can be any child. On the other side, I portrayed somebody giving out what actually is commonly known in Uganda here as back-to-school shoes. The child is seated on a stone with worn-out boots and putting on actually rags, what remains of the soldier life. So this is to portray that the life they went through was rough, but they need to start up a life. I feel happy because I know messages are going, whether they buy the artwork or they don't, but by the fact that they see it, I believe something changes in them, whether they know it or they don't, but something changes in their mind.
Okwir hopes that through his art, people will feel inspired to help in some way.
Anybody in the world has got a part to play, a very important part to play.
Enter Bob and Carol Higgins, who, unbeknownst to them, were about to find their part. The year was 1999.
Okay, you've all got a little message on your plates.
9,000 miles away, the Higginses knew very little about Uganda's problems when they were invited by friends to attend a conference there. Carol thought it might be fun because they'd get to stop in London on the way.
It wasn't a trip where it was, "Thus saith the Lord, go to minister in Uganda," or something, you know. It was just kind of a informative, fun thing to do.
But when they arrived,
The first morning we got up and I didn't know that the toilet was outside and it was raining and it was very muddy. I sat on the bed under a mosquito net, and I just cried because everything was so different. Everything was different.
They were completely unprepared for the culture shock they would experience. They'd lived in Oregon since the 60s and were now enjoying a quiet life surrounded by grandchildren.
My stomach was in a knot most of the time. Just going into the local market, you have to kind of walk down and go in, and it's kind of a closed-in area, and I just was wondering, if I go in there, will they knock me in the head and I'll never come out the other end?
Bob could not imagine finding a place more different in every way from his home back in Central Oregon.
I felt very conspicuous. Goodness, I was a white person in a black man's society, and I felt like eyes were upon me, and I just felt uncomfortable just being in the minority. I'd never been in a minority, interacted with other people who were minorities. I grew up in Oregon. We didn't hardly have any African people in the part of Oregon I was in.
But over time, Africa grew on them. Or rather, the Africans they came to know grew on them and touched something deep inside them. Bob and Carol returned a year later, working with local pastors, helping in medical clinics, and piping springs to bring clean water to villages. Then, one day, they were introduced to a group of children who would turn their world upside down and enrich it in ways they had never imagined.
They took us to the location and said, here's some orphan kids, they're just barely being taken care of, we'd like you to meet them.
The children were at Golgotha, a makeshift orphanage with too little room and even less food. It was in a village in northern Uganda, roughly 250 miles from the capital, Kampala. Bob and Carol had never seen anything like it.
They had rags on, big holes, not just little holes. I mean, big holes where they'd tie a hole together, you know, one side to the other side. They were washing their clothes in plastic bags. Maybe 3 or 4 kids would eat from one plate when they got to eat. When the kids got sick, they were told that they had demons, and so they would get prayed for, and they had to fast for 3 days.
One of them was Gabriel Obua, a boy whose huge smile outsized his thin body. He had once gone 5 days without eating.
I thought that I was going to die by then.
Gabriel was so hungry, he considered volunteering to join the LRA just so he could eat regularly. Deacon Zanyati knew of the orphan's suffering. He was one of the locals who introduced Bob and Carol to the children.
This room here, the inner one would contain more than 8 pupils with 2 papyrus mats and maybe 2 blankets to cover themselves. So it was overcrowded, and some of them would wet the bed, and as a result, since the floor was not so well, it would develop some worms, and worms would hatch and begin to eat them, and you would see blisters around them, at their ribs, at their back.
Jeffrey Alal was there too. He stole mangoes from neighbors' trees to survive. On one visit, Carol and Bob brought simple gifts for the children: plastic flutes and some dolls. In the children's eyes and hands, they were instant treasures. In spite of their wretched lives, the children sang and danced for their guests from America.
They put on a good show for us.
I think we left a few dollars to buy them a bag of beans so that might help them out, so something very, very small.
Bob and Carol were drawn back to the orphanage, traveling all day over rutted dirt roads. The orphans were touching their hearts. How could they not? Generous Americans had been helping Bob and Carol to finance the piping of springs. But there was no funding to help the children beyond providing a few necessities now and then.
We kept visiting these children not knowing that we were considered their sponsors.
And I can just remember saying, whoa, no, not us. We're not their sponsor. We can't do that. I told Carol, Carol, we don't do orphans. We don't do orphans. We just can't take on an endeavor that is so ongoing like that. Because in my mind, if things got tough and no money came in for a spring to improve, we just didn't do the next one. That's easy. No money, no project. But if you take on orphans and no money comes in, you still have them, and you still need to feed them. You still need to clothe them. You probably still need to send them to school.
But a seed had been planted in Bob and Carol's minds. They didn't know it yet, but they were, ready or not, about to do orphans.
The Lord's Resistance Army was just 2 miles away, and they would abduct people to carry what they had stolen.
A woman who had recently escaped from the rebels spread the word. The Golgotha orphans were in grave danger.
They were asking those people from that area, how about those kids? How many of them are there? How many are boys? What are their ages? How many are girls? And they were scoping it out, and so it was obvious to us they planned to come and abduct them.
The rebels had done exactly that just down the road a few years before. 139 girls at St. Mary's College in Oboke were taken in a violent nighttime attack. The last wouldn't escape until 2009, 13 years after her abduction. She arrived home with a child fathered, she says, by rebel leader Joseph Kony. But remember, it was now 2003, and the rebels were still actively terrorizing the people of northern Uganda.
We immediately that day arranged for transportation for them to go, for a truck to go out. They wouldn't let us go because it was too dangerous. So they sent some of the locals out with the truck, and we told the children, just come, you can bring one thing, and just come.
Deacon Zanyati has spent his whole life in northern Uganda, knew what the LRA was capable of doing. He is one of the men who gathered the children, doing what he could to keep them from being killed, maimed, or forced to become child soldiers or sex slaves.
We came with a truck, we parked it there at the courtyard, and everybody was very happy, and they joined in, they began to sing the song of joy, even though they were desperate and they didn't know the condition under which they would lead after living here.
I was extremely happy. I was very excited because we were having hope that we were now going to lead a better life. And I don't expect to go back to those problems that I have passed.
We contacted a local school and said, can we make a couple of your classrooms into bedrooms so that you become a boarding school and these kids have a place to sleep?
The orphans, at least for now, would be safe. For most, if not all of them, it was the first time they'd slept on mattresses. But the school where the children were temporarily housed was on a break, and the orphans would have to be out before school was back in session. Call it luck, call it a miracle. Just before they rescued the kids, Bob and Carol were able to acquire some land not far from the school.
And so now we had 3 months to build houses to house 78 kids, and we hadn't done anything.
They moved in with the paint wet.
In September 2003, Otinawa, which means our children, was born in Lira, Uganda.
When I came here, I thought that this would be a wonderful place for us.
Deacon Zanyati had now known Bob and Carol for some time, watched them grow ever more deeply committed to the rescued children. And now they had taken a huge step, creating Otinawa, an orphanage built with bricks made by hand and hearts shaped by faith.
The way they responded without money, I just looked into them as these people had the heart of humanity.
Using local labor, Bob and Carol built a circle of 10 houses. Each would shelter 8 children. They hired local widows to be house moms. Many of them had lost their husbands the same way the children had lost their parents, to the rebels or AIDS.
So we put out radio announcements, asked for women who would like to be mothers to these children.
Next came a church across the road, built for the orphans, the moms, and locals who up until then had been gathering on Sunday mornings under a mango tree. Here, offerings are as simple as a bowl of beans or a single egg, but the three-sided building rocks with music and joy. This dance of worship and celebration is done by a group that includes Otinawa girls in dresses lovingly made for them by their house moms. Then came schools, primary, secondary, and vocational. The houses and schools are all funded by private donations from generous Americans. As Bob and Carol built Otinawa, hearts on the other side of the world were about to be touched by the orphans. In a state penitentiary near the Oregon-Idaho border, a group of inmates had become self-trained and increasingly accomplished artists. The men were hardcore criminals, most behind bars for many years, and looking desperately for some kind of meaning in their lives. They'd found some of what they were looking for in their art. Then they heard about the orphans.
Their situation, from my situation, seems so bad that, you know, it's kind of hard for me to relate, because even though I'm in prison, I probably live better than them. You know, I mean, and so their level of bad is way worse than I've ever experienced or probably ever will experience.
We're gonna start out with some songs.
It was in 2005 that the inmates first felt a connection to the orphans. The prison chaplain had invited Bob and Carol to speak at a chapel service during a trip home to Oregon. As the men listened, they felt compelled to help. But how could they? The stories they were told were heartbreaking. They heard about Jeffrey Alal, the scrawny 8-year-old who had been a child soldier. They learned about the inhumanity he had witnessed, horrors beyond even a grown-up's comprehension. The inmates were told of how the community mortar, normally used by villagers to crush corn, was transformed into a torture device used to crush children's legs. They heard of human remains being cooked in saucepans, of an old man or musée brutally murdered.
This musée here was killed like nothing. Even he was also cut into pieces.
When we brought them here, Geoffrey still had the element of fear. So he would just be suspicious and very conscious, but quiet. He wouldn't talk to anybody. And when he stayed here for 2 years, he developed the mentality of running away, escaping. And we would get him when he had already gone on foot about 10 miles away from here. He was mistreating other young children. He would do a lot of destruction. Even trees, you find that the branches are cut down just like that from nowhere.
Patricia Anyango arrived at Otinawa in 2007. The memories of her tortured early life still fresh.
There are so many things that I cannot now explain, because to me I find it somehow difficult. It can make me to shed tears. I cannot.
Difficult to talk about the hell she endured at the hands of the rebels. Patricia was just 9 years old the first time she was abducted and taken into the bush. She says she was forced to dance for them, was beaten often. She saw the rebels kill many people, including children. And then it was her turn.
Those rebels keep on mistreating us. And some of the people we went with, they make me even to kill one person, my friends. And I was not willingly to do that. I said, God, why is all this thing happening to me? Why don't you now just take my life?
About 6 months later, Patricia heard the rebels talking about which one would take her as a wife.
One day when we were going for fetching water, I escaped.
Somehow, she found her way back to her village.
This is where we used, this one here, this is the place where we used to cook the food. And this one here is a place where we can grind millet for posho for us to eat.
And behind the kitchen, the family graveyard. Both of her parents were dead by the time she was 10 years old.
This one here is the one for my father. He died when I was still too young. And this one here is for the uncle of mine. He was also killed by the rebels. The name is Adupatoni.
She was home with what remained of her family, but the rebels were not far away. At night, Patricia and her family would walk to town and stay the night in this building, hoping the government soldiers nearby would protect them from the rebels. They had joined the ranks of the night commuters.
We used to sleep on the floor. Even you cannot sleep, you can just sit because there is no space for us to sleep. You can just sit.
But the rebels did come, and Patricia says the soldiers did nothing.
My mother, when when the rebels came, they also took her at the second time, and she was killed when I was seeing also.
Now, 10 years old, she was abducted again.
The rebel came back and took me again to the bush, and they say, "You young girl, if you keep on escaping from here, we are going to kill you."
This time, she was rescued within a few days and taken to one of the rehabilitation centers set up in northern Uganda to help the thousands of abducted, abused, and traumatized children like Patricia. The artwork done by the children as part of their therapy tells their chilling, heartbreaking stories of life in the grip of the LRA better than any words could. Forced marches, killing raids on innocent villages, 100 forms of torture and murder, many savage beyond comprehension.
Rehabilitation is a long psychological process. They need to sort of deal with what they've done, what they've experienced, what they've witnessed, and to rebuild their lives. It's not just about therapy, but it's trying to give them new ways to believe in their future. There's also the huge challenge of trust. Many of the children have obviously vilified some of their own communities, and there's been a breakdown of trust between the older generation because it was the children that were perpetrating many of the crimes.
Children who had finally escaped the brutality of the LRA now found themselves unwelcome and unwanted by the adults in the very villages where they had been born. They were often bullied by their former friends, who said the blood of Joseph Kony now ran in their veins.
They can say that, "You stupid girl, the blood of Kony have already entered into your head, and you are not so stupid. You don't come and stay with us, you're useless." And that one can make me to cry.
A teacher at the rehabilitation center where Patricia was living contacted Deacon Zenyati, who wasted no time arranging her transfer to Otinawa. For many of the children who had been abducted, including Patricia, the initial months at the orphanage were, to no one's surprise, haunted by their time in captivity.
Some of them come along with their dreams, bad dreams, especially Patricia. When she came here, she stayed almost for at least half a year when she was still dreaming of the things in the bush.
As orphans like Patricia grew more comfortable in their new homes, their trust in Bob and Carol and Deacon Zenyati also grew. More of their stories poured out, striking a deep chord with anyone who heard them, including those inmate artists 9,000 miles away at Snake River Penitentiary in eastern Oregon. Many of them have spent more than half their lives in prison, unaware of the beauty beyond the fences.
I came back from drinking one night, and me and my ex broke up, and I went over to collect some of my stuff, and her new boyfriend and his friend were there, and they weren't going to give me my stuff, so I told them I had a gun and told them all to sit on the couch, and I grabbed everything that was mine and I left. And I got they charged me 3 counts of first-degree kidnapping. I can't say I got a raw deal out of it. You know, I put myself in that spot, and I don't hold, you know, no grudges, no hatred, no, you know, animosity about being here. You know, because if I would have lived my life differently, I would have never been here in the first place. So it's my own fault for being here.
These men are felons, convicted of major crimes. and they know a thing or two about being shunned. They are certainly not innocents like Patricia and Jeffrey, but they are human, and so a man like Pete Sestilio worries about re-entering society when he is released after spending 18 years behind bars.
12, I'll be released. A little nervous, a lot nervous. Yeah, I guess that's one of the reasons why I want to help the kids, because that's a lot of uncertainty in my life. When I parole, I've lost my mother, father, my brother and sister since I've been down, so I'm kind of walking out with no family, so it's like me and $25 that they give you in gate money.
Johannes Tesfaye likely will never have that opportunity.
I came in under aggravated murder. This is basically natural life, so that means that I'm not getting out.
Johannes' story is heavy with irony, given his now strong connection to the Ugandan orphans. He himself left Africa as a young boy with his family to escape the atrocities of war in his native Eritrea. Jerome Sloan was born and raised in the U.S. In spite of his middle-class upbringing, he was involved in a gang killing.
My mom's a psychiatrist. I was intrigued by gangs. I was in the car with the intent to hurt somebody. I was there and I wanted to hurt the other guy. And it happened and he died. So I'm responsible for that. And I got a lot of time. I was 19 years old. I pretty much grew up in prison now.
During their visit with the inmates, Bob and Carol shared with the men stories of children like Thomas, an orphan they'd met in one of those camps for internally displaced persons.
His jaw was all out like this, just a huge infection in his jaw, and the pus was just dripping out of the bottom of his jaw, and his shoulder was all crusty from that on his shirt like that. It was just terrible. A local medicine man or local guy in the village had tried to remove a tooth with a sharpened bicycle spoke. And so he had this horrible bone infection in his jaw, and I just wanted to run. But Carol, being probably more filled with compassion, said, "No, let's take him. I think we can do something for him."
And young Bella.
She didn't speak for about 3 years. And now she's just a beautiful young woman, and she just gets so shy when you give any attention to her, but she just kind of hangs around and wants to be hugged,
The inmates heard about Deborah, who brought with her physical scars caused by her family.
The auntie had actually burned her with fire and driven her away, and so she had burns, and she had heard about Otinawa. Somehow she had heard. And she had walked for 3 days to find us. And we found her at the gate. "Please, can't I come in? Can't I come in?"
The orphan stories gripped the prisoners' hearts and wouldn't let go. They came up with an idea and wrote a proposal to prison officials. Could they create art and donate it to be sold, with all proceeds going to the orphanage? The prison officials said yes.
I've always been blown away by the tremendous talent and skill and intelligence that a lot of these men have. And once they're clean and sober and applying themselves to something constructive, they can just turn out some of the most astounding things that you ever saw.
The men buy their own supplies, and some are donated. They're not allowed to use oil paints because they're flammable, not allowed to use pencil sharpeners. Guy Clothier has been in prison since 1984 for a number of crimes, including first-degree manslaughter. He got into a fight and killed his opponent.
It was tragic for him and his family and my family and myself. And it was horrible, but now we're hopefully getting past that stuff in my life, and this is the help. This is that one more positive thing for me to do, and hopefully it'll help change my outlook on things and my decisions down the road.
For now, these men are focused on helping the kids at Otinawa, trying to put their own troubled pasts behind them.
You just see the humanity that comes out in those pictures, and you realize that they're expressing something of themselves and something that they have a hope for in themselves.
It puts our lives into perspective, and we get to feeling sorry for ourselves. but man, they really have a lot worse than us, you know. And but they're looking to the future, you know. I mean, same with us. So you know, we want to have a better life, and they do too.
The children have written to the inmates, thanking them for what they're doing.
They're like, you know, amazed that people would even do that for them, you know. And we're like, how could we not, you know? It's a chance for us to pay forward a little bit, and you know, even being in prison, we still want to do positive stuff.
My hope is that we can inspire other places to do the same, and not just us, but maybe out on the outside. You know, by helping them, it kind of helps us as well, because it kind of brings us a sense of unity, belonging, a sense of fulfillment, that I'm not just sitting here wasting my time, that I'm not limited behind these bars or this incarceration or this sentence or the stigma of what people might conceive of us.
You know, I see changes in them just as a result of the pride and the hope that this gives them in contributing something back to other people, and the joy that it gives them.
A lot of us in here, we kind of need, even if it's just for ourselves, a way to, I don't know if it's atonement or whatever you want to call it or whatever, but most of us need something mentally to say, well, I did something good, or I did this, or you know, some of us anyway, they need something to say that, and I think this is what that is for me.
Chaplain Brab believes this isn't redemption, but certainly a step in the process. The only thing the men get in return for what they're doing is a sense of purpose and the opportunity to paint and draw together.
To sit down here and be able to draw for them it's a privilege. It makes me a better person, you know, to give back to the community. We're doing our part to help the world out. It might be a little part, you know, or at least we're trying.
So beautiful. It's amazing.
The inmates' artwork is being sold in the town Bob and Carol Higgins left behind, Bend, Oregon.
And you could just jump right out of there. I mean, it's so real looking.
These people in prison are our brothers and sisters, and they're people. And now they're trying to pay back to society something that they had taken away. And it's pretty touching when you hear some of their stories. They're desperate too. So it gives them an avenue for loving.
Now, boys, are you going to let the girls be the most responsive?
Caring for the orphans has enriched the lives of Bob and Carol beyond measure.
What's going to happen?
It has also meant great sacrifice for them. It means being away from their own family. They have lived in Uganda for 11 years now, about as far from their 2 sons and 9 grandchildren as they can be.
There you go. One for you. One for you.
When you miss some of those birthdays, you miss baptisms, you miss special times.
Go, 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 Gorillas!
You miss the soccer games. You know, all those things that are part of life, and we realize you miss them, and we never get them back. Those days are gone, and so that's one of the things that when you say, well, you need to count the costs of what you're doing, that's one of the costs that we feel is really there.
For about 3 years, I was holding on to the tarmac in Redmond as the plane took off. I wanted to go, but I hated leaving home and my kids and my grandkids.
Danielle is Bob and Carol's eldest grandchild.
I miss them coming to my birthday parties, and they won't be here for my Sweet 16. Well, I wish they were here, but I know, they have to take care of the orphans. They're taking care of other kids, and we kind of need them, but we don't really need them. They need them more than I do, and more than my family does.
When each of the Higgins' grandchildren turns 11, they are brought to Otinawa to experience life in the orphanage, to experience life in Africa. Caleb was the most recent one to go. It was an eye-opening experience for a 5th grader.
A lot of people didn't have very much food. A lot of people were skinny.
As for his older cousin Samantha, she will never forget her time with the orphans.
The kids at the orphanage, they have like a chest, and
that's just full of their stuff and that's all they have. Like they have 2 pairs of clothes and a couple pairs of shoes, and they don't have very much. They have a blanket for their bed, but in America we have everything. We have dressers full of clothes and we have so much more than they do.
Each grandchild has returned home having learned an important lesson from the orphans, a lesson in what really matters in life.
They're just so happy, you can't really describe it. Like, you wonder in your head, why are they so happy? And they've been set through such a tough life. Like, it just kind of blows your mind. Like, they're so happy, and yet we're here in America complaining. I am so, lucky to live here and to have the parents I have and the life I have.
I have lived a life of sorrow, even though in my heart I long for joy.
For Patricia, a chance to visit the village where she was born, about 2 hours from Otinawa, is bittersweet. She has lost both of her parents, her grandfather, her uncle, and a beloved aunt who had helped care for her family.
This is my grandmother, and she's now too old. She cannot do anything, and her hands cannot enable her to do anything. She's remaining with 5 children, 3 girls and then 2 boys. If we came back, she's the only one who can keep us. She's now 75 years old. Because of the sorrow, she's now becoming more weak every day.
Patricia loves her grandmother, loves to see her, but life in this village is heartbreakingly meager.
This one here is the place where my grandmother was. She was resting here, but it is a place where we can sleep using this thing here. This one here is the bed for us when we come back. And this one here is the bed sheet. When I come back here, sometimes I can start thinking how am I going to stay, because the life is too difficult. And during holidays, if I came back, I found the life is very difficult for me to stay because all the basic needs, they're not given it to me. And we can sometimes sleep without eating.
Patricia's grandmother has little food for herself, but as Patricia is about to leave, she sends the younger children on a mission to catch a chicken, a gift for Deacons and Yadi, who brought Patricia to Otinawa and gave her a chance at a future.
She's now happy to see me because I'm smart and I'm healthy. Now, if all of us in the at Otinawa there we are healthy like this, she just praise God for what has happened.
Patricia and the other children at Otinawa now eat 3 times a day, often a meal of beans and posho, a thick porridge made from corn. The children are happy to have even that.
And lots of times we'll find, cassava or maybe maize cobs underneath their mattresses because they'll steal it from the gardens. Just in case they don't get fed, they'll have something to eat. And so it takes about a year for them to realize they really are going to get to eat another meal.
The children are clothed, given responsibilities, educated, and most importantly, loved.
For someone to leave his own country and come to another country to take care of you, that one means a blessing to me.
Everything is provided to us. That is why it can make me happy and I can enjoy school. I can forget all those problems that I went through.
The Otinawa schools are consistently ranked number 1 out of 200 schools in the area.
Education is the key for these kids and giving them a skill.
Does he understand what causes keloids?
Occasionally, volunteer teams from the U.S. come to offer medical and dental care to the children, the house moms, and people from town.
Okay, so I'm going to put a piece of cotton, it's very soft, next to your tooth, and you need to stay open just like that. Perfect.
For many, it's the first time they've seen a doctor or dentist. Bob and Carol aren't looking for the orphans to be adopted out of the country. They are trying to prepare the children to become Uganda's next generation of leaders. They're taught vocations like working in Otinawa's cafe and gift shop, computer skills, beekeeping, sewing. Some of the children plan to go on to college. Gabrielle is studying to become a lawyer.
Gabriel's one of my success stories, and he came just literally in rags. And that was 8 years ago, and he came with his hands out. Help me, I'm desperate. But now he comes to you and he says, how can I help you? It's just such a neat full circle.
Jeffrey, now the head boy in his Otinawa household and a mentor to the younger kids, wants to become an electrician.
He has dramatically changed, and I believe he is going to have a bright future.
And the first little ray of sunshine we saw with Jeffrey, he brought us a little bag of G-nuts, of peanuts that he had grown himself here. And it was his way of saying thank you to us. Just this little bag was wonderful.
Linda hopes to become a doctor. And Patricia? She no longer dreams of her time in captivity. She now dreams of becoming an accountant or musician, maybe even both.
We've had our eye on Patricia. She's an outstanding girl. Dances well, sings well. She's just going to be someone who's a leader in this nation somehow.
Patricia and the others are grateful to Bob and Carol for offering them a chance at a future, giving them hope.
I think God has put something into their heart. There is no one in this world that can surrender to do all those things.
I see them as if they're my father and they're my mother, though they're not my biological parents.
I've done so many things, great things for my life. I am well fed, well accommodated, well educated. Life is just easy, as you can see me how I am now.
If you ask Bob and Carol how many children they have, they will say 260 and counting. They have a wait list of about 1,000. The children are the reason the Higginses are here. The children are the reason the Higginses will never leave.
I think I probably won't come home until I don't have any plans to come home. I mean, how can you leave those children? It's my life.
Deacon Zanyati has known Bob and Carol for over a decade. He works with them closely every day.
Even though they are not even the native of this place, they chose to die with these people. So my judgment is that God sent the right people for these children.
Challenges? Many. Sacrifices? Too numerous to count. Frustrations? Woven into the tapestry of everyday life at Otinawa. Worth it?
So precious.
For Bob and Carol, absolutely, and never more so than when they see the children acting like, well, like children.
Where did you come from, baby?
The kids getting out of school and they're walking down the path and 2 or 3 of them will have their arms around each other and there's that connection and there's just the chatter, or you hear some of the laughter. They're just children being children. You realize this isn't just a little thing that's nice to do. I mean, for these children, it's some life and death. It's whether they're going to make it or not. We have some children, terrible things were done to them. And to see that maybe they can make it. Maybe they'll make it.
Yesu ni wangu wazima wa milele. Yesu ni wangu wazima wa milele.
As the children of Otinawa flourish and learn and grow and succeed as young men and women, as young Ugandans poised to one day serve and lead their towns and city and country, Bob's now cautious, maybe they'll make it, will surely become instead a glowing and growing certainty. Faith held fast will yield a promise fulfilled. With help and support from an artist in Uganda, inmates in Eastern Oregon,
I'm learning that it doesn't take that much, is what I would think it would take to help somebody like that.
and the long-distance love of 2 sons and 9 grandchildren,
I have the best grandparents in the world.
2 humble former high school teachers will have transformed children nearly crushed by despair and cruelty into adults destined to be their native land's best and brightest. Hope lost will have become hope found.